The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, thick cream paper sealed with an embossed crest that Jasmine Rivers had never seen before. She held it carefully in her hands, standing in the narrow hallway of her cramped Brooklyn apartment, still wearing yesterday's coffee-stained blouse and the weight of another sleepless night. The return address read, Whitmore and Associates, Estate Planning, Manhattan. Her heart skipped as she tore open the seal, remembering the phone call from 3 weeks ago. About her great-uncle Theodore, a man she'd met exactly twice in her 28 years of life. Dear Miss Rivers, the letter began in elegant script. You are hereby requested to attend the formal reading of the last will and testament of Theodore Blake, deceased. Your presence is required at our offices this Friday at 2 p.m. sharp. Frowned. Theodore Blake had been her grandmother's brother, a mysterious figure who'd made his fortune in early tech investments before disappearing into a life of luxury and isolation. She'd always wondered why he'd never married, never had children of his own. Now, apparently, she was about to find out what he'd left behind. Friday arrived with unexpected autumn rain, turning Manhattan's streets into mirror-black rivers. Jasmine stood before the towering glass building that housed Whitmore and Associates, her best navy dress clinging uncomfortably to her nervous perspiration. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt like ascending into another world entirely. The conference room was all mahogany and leather, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of Central Park. 3 people sat around the polished table. An elderly man in a perfectly tailored suit who introduced himself as Mr. Whitmore, a sharp-eyed woman with silver hair who remained nameless, and him. Adrian Blake sat at the far end of the table like he owned not just the chair, but the entire building. Jasmine had seen his face in business magazines, always photographed in stark black and white, always unsmiling. CEO of Blake Technologies. Net worth hovering around $3 billion. Known for his revolutionary work in artificial intelligence and his complete inability to maintain any personal relationship longer than 6 months. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe, with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his hands through it and eyes the color of storm clouds. When those eyes fixed on her, Jasmine felt like she was being evaluated, cataloged, and possibly found wanting. Miss Rivers, Mr. Whitmore began, opening a leather portfolio. Thank you for coming. Be direct as your great-uncle preferred. Theodore Blake has left you a substantial inheritance. Jasmine's breath caught. I'm sorry, what? $50 million? Whitmore continued matter-of-factly, along with his estate in the Hamptons, contingent upon one very specific condition. The room went silent, except for the soft patter of rain against the windows. Adrian leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable but intense. What condition? Jasmine managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. Whitmore cleared his throat. You must reside in the Blake family mansion in Manhattan for exactly 90 consecutive days, beginning immediately alongside Mr. Adrian Blake here, is Theodore's nephew and the current owner of the property. The words hit her like a physical blow. I have to what? Adrian spoke for the first time, his voice low and controlled but edged with what sounded like barely contained fury. Apparently my uncle decided to turn his death into a social experiment. There's more, Whitmore added. Should either party leave the residence before the 90 days are complete, Miss Rivers forfeits the inheritance entirely. And Mr. Blake forfeits his controlling share in Blake Technologies, which would revert to the Theodore Blake Foundation. Jasmine stared at Adrian, whose jaw had tightened to the point where she could see the muscle working beneath his skin. This is insane, she breathed. My uncle was many things, Adrian said coldly, but sane wasn't always one of them. Why me? Jasmine asked, turning back to Whitmore. I barely knew him. The lawyer consulted his notes. According to his personal papers, Theodore followed your career quite closely. He was impressed by your work on behalf of underprivileged families, your pro bono cases, your refusal to compromise your principles even when it would have been financially beneficial. Heat flooded Jasmine's cheeks. She'd never known anyone. Was watching, evaluating her choices. And he thought that qualified me to be someone's unwilling roommate. He thought Whitmore said carefully that you represented something Mr. Blake needed to learn. Adrian's laugh was sharp and humorless. And what exactly did my dear uncle think I needed to learn from a bleeding heart lawyer who drives a 15-year-old Honda and lives in a fourth-floor walk-up? The insult stung, but Jasmine lifted her chin. Maybe he thought you needed to learn that not everything can be bought, Mr. Blake. Their eyes locked across the table, and something electric passed between them. Not attraction exactly, but recognition. Of an equal opponent, the mansion has been prepared for dual occupancy, Whitmore continued diplomatically. Separate wings, separate entrances if desired. The staff has been instructed to ensure both parties' comfort and privacy. Jasmine tried to process what she was hearing. $50 million. Enough to pay off her student loans, help her parents with their medical bills. Maybe even start her own practice focused on the cases that mattered, instead of chasing billable. Ours at the corporate firm that barely tolerated her idealism, but 90 days with Adrian Blake? 90 days with a man who looked at her like she was an inconvenience? A puzzle he had no interest in solving? I need time to think, she said finally. Unfortunately, Whitmore replied, the terms require an immediate decision. The clock begins ticking at midnight tonight, regardless of whether you choose to participate. Adrian stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the marble floor. This is ridiculous. I won't be held hostage by a dead man's delusions. Then you'll lose your company. The silver-haired woman spoke for the first time, her voice crisp and businesslike. Blake Technologies will be donated to charity, and you'll be left with whatever personal assets you've managed to accumulate outside the corporate structure. Adrian's face went pale. Jasmine realized this wasn't just about inconvenience for him. This was about everything he'd built, everything he'd worked for. And if I refuse the inheritance, Jasmine asked quietly, then you return to your life as... It was Whitmore said. No harm, no foul. But no second chances either. This offer expires the moment you walk out that door. Jasmine thought about her tiny apartment with its leaking faucet and broken air conditioner. She thought about her parents, aging and proud, refusing help even as their medical bills mounted. She thought about the client she'd had to turn away last week because the firm wouldn't approve the pro bono hours. She thought about the man standing across from her, radiating wealth and privilege and cold, controlled anger. 90 days, she said slowly. 90 days, Whitmore confirmed. Adrian turned to stare out the window at the city sprawling below them. When he spoke, his voice was resigned. The Blake Mansion is on East 73rd Street. Be there by 8 tonight if you're serious about this madness. He moved toward the door, then paused without turning around. And Miss Rivers? Don't expect me to make this easy for you. Jasmine sat in the lingering silence, staring at the legal documents spread across the table like tarot cards predicting an uncertain future. He's not as heartless as he pretends to be, Whitmore said gently. What makes you say that? The old lawyer smiled. Because if he truly didn't care about anything but money, he would have walked away from Blake.
Technologies without a second thought rather than agree to this arrangement.
That evening, Jasmine stood on the sidewalk outside the Blake mansion, a single suitcase in her hand and terror in her throat. The building rose before her like a monument to wealth and power. All limestone and wrought iron, with windows that glowed golden against the darkening sky. The door opened before she could knock, revealing a distinguished man in his 60s, wearing an impeccable black suit. Miss Rivers, I presume? I'm Henry, the house manager. Mr. Blake is expecting you. The foyer alone was larger than her entire apartment, with marble floors that reflected the light from an enormous crystal chandelier. Oil paintings in heavy gilt. Frames lined the walls, depicting stern-faced ancestors who seemed to disapprove of her presence. Your quarters are in the East Wing, Henry said, leading her toward a grand staircase. Mr. Blake's private residence occupies the West Wing. Common areas include the library, the solarium, and the main dining room, should you choose to take meals together. They climbed the stairs in silence, their footsteps echoing in the vast space. The East Wing was elegant but impersonal, like an expensive hotel suite. Her bedroom was 3 times the size of her entire apartment, with a marble bathroom and a walk-in closet that could have housed a small family. Dinner is served at 7:30, Henry informed her. Will you be joining Mr. Blake this evening? Jasmine set her suitcase on the enormous bed, feeling dwarfed by the opulence surrounding her. Does he want me to join him? Henry's expression remained perfectly neutral. Mr. Blake rarely expresses wants, Miss Rivers, only expectations. Alone in the luxurious bedroom, Jasmine unpacked her few belongings, feeling like a fraud in borrowed finery. She'd agreed to this insane arrangement, but she hadn't really thought through what it would mean. Living with a stranger, a man who clearly resented her presence for 3 months. At 7:25, she made her way downstairs following the sound of clinking silverware to an elegant dining room dominated by a table that could have seated 20. Adrian sat at one end, reading something on his tablet. Still dressed in his business suit from earlier, he glanced up when she entered, his gaze taking in her simple black dress and nervous posture. "I wasn't sure you'd show up," he said without preamble. "I gave my word," Jasmine replied, taking the seat across from him. "People break their word all the time." He set down his tablet and studied her with those unsettling gray eyes. "What makes you different?" Before she could answer, Henry appeared with the first course, setting down plates of something that looked like art and probably cost more than Jasmine's monthly rent. They ate in silence for several minutes before Adrian spoke again. "Tell me about your work." "You mean my bleeding heart law practice?" she asked, unable to keep the edge out of her voice. His mouth twitched, almost like he was fighting a smile. "I apologize for that comment. It was uncalled for." The apology surprised her. "I work for Morrison & Associates. Corporate law, mostly contract disputes. Not exactly world-changing work. But you do pro bono cases." "When I can?" She met his gaze steadily. "Some things matter more than money, such as justice, fairness, helping people who can't help themselves." She paused, then added, "Things your uncle seemed to understand, even if you don't."
Adrian
Leaned back in his chair, studying her with renewed interest. "You think I don't understand justice? Think you understand profit margins and market share? Think you've forgotten there are people behind the numbers?" Instead of taking offense, he nodded slowly. "You might be right about that." The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. "Why did you agree to this?" Jasmine asked. "You could have walked away from the company, started over." Adrian's expression hardened. "Blake Technologies isn't just a company. It's my life's work. Every algorithm, every innovation, every breakthrough. I built it from the ground up after my uncle gave me the initial funding. I won't lose it because of his posthumous manipulation. Even if it means spending 90 days with me," he met her gaze directly, "even then." After dinner, Jasmine retreated to her wing of the house, feeling emotionally drained. The luxury that surrounded her felt suffocating rather than comfortable. She'd agreed to this arrangement for the money, but already she was beginning to understand the true cost. She'd seen something in Adrian's eyes during dinner. A flicker of vulnerability beneath the controlled exterior. Theodore Blake hadn't just thrown them together randomly. He'd seen something in both of them that needed to be challenged. Changed. The question was whether either of them would survive the process with their hearts intact. As she prepared for bed in the enormous marble bathroom, Jasmine caught sight of herself in the mirror. Her reflection looked small and uncertain, overwhelmed by the grandeur surrounding her. But there was something else there too. A spark of determination that reminded her why she'd gotten into law in the first place. She'd wanted to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Maybe, just maybe, that included a cold billionaire who'd forgotten how to be human. Somewhere in the West Wing, Adrian Blake stood at his bedroom window, looking out at the city lights. He'd spent years building walls around himself, protecting his work, his fortune, his carefully controlled world from the chaos of human emotion. Now a small, fierce lawyer with principles he'd forgotten he'd ever possessed was sleeping under his roof, and for the first time in years, those walls felt less like protection and more like a prison. 9 days to go. The first week passed like a carefully choreographed dance of avoidance. Jasmine established routines that kept her path from crossing Adrian's, except during the obligatory dinners, which had become exercises in polite conversation about weather and current events. She worked from the library during the day, taking calls from her firm and reviewing cases on her laptop, while surrounded by leather-bound books that probably cost more than her annual salary. Adrian, meanwhile, seemed to operate on a schedule designed by robots. He left for Blake Technologies every morning at exactly 7:15, returned at 6:30, and disappeared into his home office until dinner. After their meals, he vanished back to his wing of the house, leaving Jasmine to explore the mansion's many rooms alone. It was during one of these solitary evenings that she discovered the music room, hidden behind a door she'd assumed was another closet. The space took her breath away. A grand piano dominated the center of the room, its ebony surface reflecting the soft light from an elegant chandelier. The walls were lined with instruments, guitars, violins, even a cello resting in the corner like a sleeping giant. Jasmine approached the piano cautiously, running her fingers along its pristine keys without pressing them. She hadn't played in years, not since her grandmother's old upright had been sold to pay for nursing home costs. "Do you play?" She spun around to find Adrian standing in the doorway, having traded his usual business attire for dark jeans and a gray sweater. The casual clothing made him look younger, more approachable, though his expression remained guarded. "I used to," Jasmine admitted. "A long time ago. My uncle loved music. He said it was the only language that didn't require translation." Adrian stepped into the room, his eyes moving over the instruments with something that might have been fondness. "He tried to teach me piano when I was 12. "What happened?" Adrian's mouth twisted into a bitter smile. "I was more interested in computers than Chopin. I thought music was a waste of time that could be better spent learning programming languages. And now?" It was quiet for a long moment, then moved to the piano bench and sat down. His fingers found the keys without hesitation, and suddenly the room filled with the haunting melody of a piece Jasmine recognized but couldn't name. His playing was technically perfect, but somehow empty. Like he was reciting a mathematical formula rather than expressing emotion. When the last notes faded, he looked up to find her watching him intently. "You play beautifully," she said softly. "I play correctly," he corrected. "There's a difference." Without thinking, Jasmine moved to the bench and sat beside him, their shoulders almost touching. "May I?" He nodded and shifted slightly to give her access to the keys. Her fingers trembled as she began to play, choosing a simple melody her grandmother had taught her. Where Adrian's playing had been precise and controlled, hers was warm and slightly imperfect, filled with emotion that transcended technical skill. As she played, she became aware of Adrian watching her, his gray eyes focused on her face rather than her hands. When she finished, the silence that followed felt different than their usual polite pauses. It felt intimate. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked. "My grandmother. She said music wasn't about playing the right notes, it was about telling a story." Jasmine's voice grew soft with memory. She used to say that the piano remembers every song it's ever played, and if you listen carefully, you can hear the echoes. Adrian's fingers found the keys again, but this time he played her melody, adding his own technical precision to her emotional foundation. The result was something neither could have achieved alone, a perfect blend of skill and soul. They played together for over an hour, their hands occasionally brushing as they reached for the same keys, creating sparks that had nothing to do with music. When Henry appeared to announce that coffee was ready in the solarium, they both startled like they'd been caught doing something forbidden. "I should go," Jasmine said quickly, standing up from the bench. Of course, Adrian replied, but his voice held a note of disappointment that made her pause at the door. "Maybe we could play again sometime," she found herself saying. His smile, when it came, was small but genuine. "I'd like that." Eh? The next morning brought unexpected drama in the form of Rebecca Martinez, Adrian's assistant, who arrived at the mansion, looking like she'd stepped off the cover of a business magazine, tall, elegant, and perfectly composed. She swept into the breakfast room, where Jasmine sat alone with her coffee and yesterday's newspaper. "You must be the inheritance girl," Rebecca said without preamble, her tone polite but cold. "I'm Rebecca Martinez, Mr. Blake's executive assistant." Jasmine bristled at being referred to as the inheritance girl, but kept her voice level. "Jasmine Rivers. Nice to meet you." Rebecca's smile was sharp as a blade. "I'm sure it is." I wanted to speak with you about the arrangement you have with Adrian. I wasn't aware our arrangement was any of your business, Miss Martinez. That affects Adrian's well-being is my business, Rebecca replied, settling into the chair across from Jasmine with the confidence of someone who belonged. I've been with Blake Technologies for 8 years. I've seen him through hostile takeovers, media scandals, and 3 different attempts by gold diggers to separate him from his fortune. The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Jasmine sat down her coffee cup carefully. Are you suggesting that I'm a gold digger? I'm suggesting that $50 million is a powerful motivator for someone in your financial situation. Rebecca's research had clearly been thorough. Student loans, parents with mounting medical bills, an apartment in a building that should probably be condemned. It must be very tempting to do whatever it takes to secure that inheritance. Heat flooded Jasmine's cheeks, but she forced herself to remain calm. What exactly are you accusing me of? I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm simply pointing out that Adrian is particularly vulnerable right now. The stress of potentially losing his company, being forced into this ridiculous living situation. It would be easy for someone to take advantage of that vulnerability. And you're here to protect him from me? Rebecca's smile widened. I'm here to protect him from anyone who might hurt him. Adrian may be brilliant in business, but he's surprisingly naive when it comes to personal relationships. He tends to see the best in people, even when evidence suggests otherwise. Before Jasmine could respond, Adrian himself entered the breakfast room, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to sharp awareness as he took in the tension between the 2 women. Rebecca, he said carefully, wasn't expecting you this morning. The Patterson merger requires your immediate attention, she replied, standing smoothly and moving to his side. The lawyers need your signature on the revised contracts. Adrian's gaze moved between Rebecca and Jasmine, clearly sensing undercurrents he didn't understand. Of course, let me grab my briefcase. As he left the room, Rebecca turned back to Jasmine with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was lovely meeting you, Miss Rivers. I'm sure we'll be seeing much more of each other. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Jasmine watched the other woman glide away, feeling like she'd just been marked as enemy territory. That evening's dinner was more stilted than usual, with Adrian seeming distracted and Jasmine still fuming from her encounter with Rebecca. Finally, unable to stand the tension any longer, she set down her fork and looked directly at him. Your assistant doesn't like me very much. Adrian paused mid-bite. Rebecca spoke with you?
She made it clear that she considers me a threat too.
Your well-being. Jasmine kept her tone neutral, though inside she was seething. She seems to think I'm some kind of fortune hunter. Rebecca is protective, Adrian said carefully. She's seen me deal with people who were more interested in my bank account than in me as a person. And you think that's what I'm doing? He met her gaze directly. Are you? The question hit her like a slap. Jasmine pushed back from the table, her chair scraping against the marble floor. If that's what you really think of me, then this conversation is over. She was halfway to the door when his voice stopped her. Jasmine, wait. He stood up, running a hand through his hair in frustration. That's not what I think. But you have to understand, in my world, people's motives are rarely pure. I've learned to question everything. She turned back to face him, seeing something raw and vulnerable in his expression that made her anger falter. What a lonely way to live. It's a safe way to live. Safe isn't the same as living. She moved closer, drawn by the pain she heard beneath his controlled words. When was the last time you trusted someone completely? When was the last time you let yourself be vulnerable with another person? Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching her face as if looking for some sign of deception. Can't. Remember, he admitted finally. That's not protection, Adrian. It's prison. Something shifted in his expression, and suddenly the space between them felt charged with electricity. They were standing close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. Close enough to notice the way his breath quickened. When she said his name, "You scare me," he said quietly. Why? Because when I'm with you, I want to trust again. I want to believe that not everyone has an agenda. His hand reached up as if to touch her face, then dropped back to his side. And that terrifies me more than any hostile takeover or corporate espionage ever could. Jasmine felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Adrian. Before she could finish the thought, his phone rang, the sharp sound cutting through the intimate moment like a knife. He glanced at the screen and his expression immediately shifted back to business mode. I have to take this, he said, already stepping away from her. It's the Tokyo office. And just like that, the walls went back up, leaving Jasmine standing alone in the dining room. Wondering if she'd imagined the whole exchange, the days that followed settled into a new pattern. Their dinners became less formal, filled with actual conversation about books, current events, even childhood memories. Adrian began joining her in the library some evenings, working on his laptop while she reviewed case files. Both of them comfortable in the shared silence, but it was the music room that became their true sanctuary. They met there almost every night after dinner, playing together with an intimacy that felt more profound than anything physical. Through music, they learned to communicate in ways that words couldn't capture. Adrian's rigid control began to soften, while Jasmine's natural warmth drew melodies from him that he'd forgotten he knew how to play. It was during one of these musical sessions that disaster struck. They were playing a complex piece that required 4 hands, their bodies pressed close together on the piano bench, when the music room door burst open. Rebecca stood in the entrance, her perfectly composed expression cracking as she took in the intimate scene before her. Adrian, she said, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. We need to talk. Adrian's hands stilled on the keys. Can it wait until tomorrow, Rebecca? It's after office hours. No, it cannot wait. Her eyes flicked to Jasmine with undisguised hostility. The Patterson merger is falling apart. You're questioning your judgment, your ability to lead the company. There are rumors about your living situation, about how this inheritance scheme is affecting your decision-making. Jasmine felt her stomach drop. She started to stand up from the bench, but Adrian's hand on her arm stopped her. What kind of rumors? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Rebecca's smile was sharp with triumph. The kind that suggests you're being manipulated by a gold-digging lawyer who's using her feminine wiles to secure $50 million? The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Jasmine felt heat flood her cheeks as she realized the implications. Her presence in Adrian's life wasn't just affecting their personal relationship, it was threatening his professional reputation. That's enough, Adrian said, standing up from the piano bench. You're out of line, Rebecca. Am I? Rebecca's composure finally cracked completely. I've watched you build Blake Technologies into an empire, Adrian. I've been by your side through every challenge, every triumph. And now you're throwing it all away for someone you've known for 3 weeks? The pain in her voice was unmistakable, and suddenly Jasmine understood. This wasn't just about protecting Adrian's business interests. Rebecca was in love with him, and had been for years. Rebecca, Adrian said more gently, clearly recognizing the same thing Jasmine had. This isn't about the company, isn't it? Tears glittered in Rebecca's eyes. She's going to destroy everything you've worked for, Adrian. Can't you see that? Jasmine couldn't stand it anymore. The accusation, the pain in the other woman's voice, the way Adrian looked torn between loyalty and something else he couldn't name. She stood up abruptly. She's right, Jasmine said quietly. My being here is causing problems for your company. Maybe I should leave. No. Adrian's voice was firm, immediate. You're not leaving. But your reputation can survive some gossip. He turned to Rebecca, his expression hardening. But what it can't survive is me making decisions based on fear instead of logic. The Patterson merger was always risky. They're looking for excuses to back out. They'll find them regardless of my personal life. Rebecca stared at him for a long moment, her professional mask finally slipping completely to reveal the heartbreak beneath. I see, she said softly. I suppose there's nothing more to discuss then? She turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the marble floor. With mechanical precision, Adrian started to follow her, but Jasmine caught his arm. Let her go, she said gently. She needs time to process this. Adrian looked down at her, his gray eyes turbulent with emotion. She's been more than just an assistant. She's been my friend for 8 years. She's been in love with you for 8 years, Jasmine corrected softly. There's a difference. He was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. I should have seen it. I should have been more careful. You can't control how other people feel. Adrian, you can only control how you respond to it. They stood there in the music room, surrounded by silent instruments, both aware that something fundamental had shifted between them. The outside world had intruded on their carefully constructed bubble, forcing them to confront the reality of what was growing between them. Jasmine, Adrian said finally, his voice low and intense. Whatever happens with the company, with Rebecca, with any of it, I want you to know that these past few weeks have been the best I've had in years. Her heart stuttered at the admission. Adrian. The scandal broke 3 days later with the subtlety of a nuclear explosion. The headline screamed across the front page of the New York Business Journal, Blake Technologies CEO living with inheritance gold digger. Company stock. Plummets as leadership questions mount. Jasmine stared at her own photograph clearly taken with a telephoto. Lens as she left the mansion positioned next to one of Adrian looking stern and powerful in his business suit. The article painted her as a calculating opportunist who had somehow manipulated a dying old man into leaving her millions, then moved in with his wealthy nephew to secure her claim. The source, who requested anonymity due to their close working relationship with Mr. Blake, suggests that the CEO's judgment has been severely compromised by his inappropriate relationship with Miss Rivers. A struggling lawyer with significant financial difficulties? She didn't need to guess who the anonymous source was. Rebecca had made good on her threat. The fallout was immediate and devastating. Adrian found her in the library an hour later. The newspaper scattered across the floor where she'd thrown it in frustration. He looked haggard, his usually perfect appearance disheveled from what had clearly been a morning of crisis management. The board called an emergency meeting, he said without preamble. They're demanding my resignation. Jasmine felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. Because of me. Because of fear, he corrected, moving to where she sat curled in the leather armchair. Because they'd rather sacrifice me than deal with bad publicity. Then let 'em, she said quietly. Resign. Walk away from Blake Technologies. It's just a company. Adrian stared at her in shock. It's my life's work. It's a building full of computers and conference rooms, she said, standing to face him. Your life's work is the technology you've created, the innovations that will outlast any corporate structure. Blake Technologies is just the name on the door. You don't understand, I understand that you're so afraid of losing control that you can't see when holding on is destroying you. Her voice was gentle but firm. Adrian, what good is saving the company if it costs you your soul?
Oh.
Before he could respond, Henry appeared in the doorway looking unusually flustered. Mr. Blake, there are reporters outside the gate, quite a lot of them. Through the library windows, they could see the crowd gathering on the sidewalk cameras. It's microphones, satellite trucks from every major news network. Their private sanctuary had become a fishbowl. I have to go, Adrian said, already moving toward the door. The board meeting is in an hour. Wait. Jasmine caught his arm, and when he turned back to her, she saw something that broke her heart. Fear. Raw, undisguised terror at the thought of losing everything he'd built. Whatever happens in that boardroom, she said softly, remember that. You are more than Blake Technologies. You're brilliant and innovative and capable of building something new if you have to. Don't let them make you forget that. He kissed her then, hard and desperate, like he was trying to memorize the taste. Of her. I love you, he whispered against her lips. The words hung between them, precious and fragile, and perfectly timed to be completely impossible. I love you too, she whispered back. That's why I'm going to pack my bags. Adrian pulled back, his eyes widening. What? I'm leaving, Adrian. Today, I'm going to hold a press conference, announce that I'm voluntarily forfeiting the inheritance, and disappear from your life before I destroy anything else. No. His grip on her arms tightened. Absolutely not. This is the only way. This is you running away, he said fiercely. This is you deciding that I'm not worth fighting for. The accusation stung because it held a grain of truth. She was running the way she'd always run when things got complicated. But this time, she was running to protect him, not herself. I'm trying to save your company, she said. I don't want you to save my company. I want you to stay and let me save us. The intensity in his voice, the desperate hope in his gray eyes, almost broke her resolve. Almost. There is no us, Adrian. Not really. We've known each other for 5 weeks. We're living together because of a legal contract, not because we chose each other freely. When this is over, I want to choose you every day for the rest of my life, he interrupted. I want to wake up next to you and argue with you about music and watch you fight for people who can't fight for themselves. I want to build something real with you, something that has nothing to do with inheritance clauses or board meetings or what anyone else thinks. Tears were streaming down her cheeks now. It's too late. The damage is done. The damage is just beginning if you walk away now. But she was already pulling out of his arms, already moving toward the door. I'm sorry, Adrian. I'm so sorry. She made it 3 steps before his voice stopped her. If you leave now, you're proving Rebecca right. You're proving that you were only here for the money after all. The words hit her like a physical blow, but she didn't turn around. Maybe I am. The board meeting was a massacre. Adrian sat at the head of the polished conference table, facing 12 of the most powerful business leaders in New York, and watched his life's work get dissected like a laboratory specimen. The stock has dropped 15% in 3 days. Board member Harrison Wells announced, sliding a financial report across the table. Major investors are pulling out. Patterson merger is dead. Market volatility is temporary, Adrian replied evenly. Blake Technologies' fundamentals remain strong. Do they? It's from Margaret Foster, the steel-haired chairwoman Hood. Helped Adrian secure his first major contract 8 years earlier. Because from where I sit, it looks like our CEO's judgment has been compromised by a very public personal scandal. My personal life has nothing to do with my ability to run this company, doesn't it? Rebecca spoke from her position near the back of the room, having been called to provide testimony about Adrian's recent behavior. You've been distracted for weeks. It's missing meetings, delegating important decisions, spending your evenings playing piano instead of reviewing quarterly reports. Adrian's jaw clenched. The betrayal cut deeper than any corporate maneuvering. I've never missed an important meeting. Chang Industries' call last Tuesday, Rebecca countered smoothly. The Yamamoto presentation you postponed twice. The enough. Margaret Foster's voice cut through the tension. Adrian, we've worked together for nearly a decade. I've seen you navigate hostile takeovers, media scandals, and economic downturns without breaking a sweat. But this situation is different because it involves a woman. Because it involves your heart, Margaret said gently. And hearts make terrible business advisors. The room fell silent. Adrian looked around the table at these people who'd been his colleagues, his advisors, his professional family. They were asking him to choose between love and ambition, between the woman who'd brought music back into his life and the company that had given his life meaning. I need 24 hours, he said finally. Adrian Harrison began. 24 hours, Adrian repeated, standing up. Then I'll give you my answer. He walked out of Blake's Technologies knowing it might be for the last time as CEO. Jasmine was gone when he returned to the mansion. Her clothes, her laptop, her coffee mug with the chip in the handle that she'd claimed from the kitchen, Olive, it vanished as if she'd never existed. The only trace left behind was a letter on the piano bench in the music room. Adrian, by the time you read this, I'll have held my press conference and released a statement forfeiting all claims to the inheritance. The lawyers assure me this will clear you of any suggestion of impropriety or manipulation. I need you to know that these past 5 weeks have been the most alive I've ever felt. You showed me a world I never imagined I could belong to, not because of its luxury, but because of its possibilities. You made me want to be braver, stronger, more than I ever thought I could be. But I also need you to know that I could never live with myself. If I were the reason you lost something you'd worked so hard to build, Blake Technologies isn't just a company to you, it's proof that you can create something meaningful, something that lasts. I won't be the person who takes that away from you. Maybe Uncle Theodore was wrong to throw us together like this. Maybe some people are too different, from 2 different worlds, to make it work.
No.
But he wasn't wrong about you. You're extraordinary, Adrian Blake, you just forgot for a while. Don't let them make you forget again. All my love, Jasmine Pease. Play Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major? The one your uncle tried to teach you? I have a feeling you're ready for it. Now Adrian read the letter 3 times before his vision cleared enough to see the piano keys. His hands shook as he began to play the piece she'd mentioned. And for the first time in his adult life, the music sounded like more than just notes. It sounded like heartbreak. Jasmine's press conference made national news. Standing on the steps of the courthouse in a simple blue suit, she faced a sea of cameras and microphones with the same composure she'd once brought to pro bono cases. I am voluntarily forfeiting all claims to the inheritance left to me by Theodore Blake, she announced, her voice clear and steady. This decision is mine alone. It's made freely and without coercion from any party. Mr. Adrian Blake had no knowledge of my intentions and bears no responsibility for my choice. The questions came like machine gun fire. Were you in a romantic relationship with Mr. Blake? My relationship with Mr. Blake is irrelevant to this legal matter. Did you manipulate Theodore Blake into including you in his will? I met Theodore Blake exactly twice in my lifetime, both times at family funerals when I was a child. I had no contact with him prior to his death. Why are you giving up $50 million? For the first time, her composure wavered slightly, because some things are worth more than money. That night, alone in her cramped Brooklyn apartment with its leaking faucet and broken air conditioner, Jasmine watched the news coverage of her press conference. The talking heads debated her motives, her sanity, her future. One commentator called her either the most noble woman in America or the most foolish. She was beginning to think both might be true. Her phone had been ringing nonstop since the press conference. Reporters, job offers from law firms impressed by her integrity. Even a few marriage proposals from men who'd apparently been moved by her sacrifice. She'd ignored them all. The only call she wanted was the one that didn't come. Adrian spent the night walking the empty halls of the mansion, seeing Jasmine's ghost in every room. The dining room where they'd shared their first real conversation. The library where she'd worked surrounded by law books and scattered papers. The music room where they'd found a language that transcended words. He found Henry in the kitchen the next morning, preparing breakfast for one with the efficiency of long practice. She's really gone, Adrian said, the words feeling strange in his mouth. Yes, sir, Henry replied. Though if I may say so, she's not the first person to leave this house. She might be the first to leave it better than she found it. Adrian looked at his longtime employee, seeing something in the man's expression that he'd never noticed before. You liked her? I respected her, sir. There's a difference, though. In this case, they happened to align. She gave up $50 million. She gave up much more than that, Henry said quietly. But then again, so did you. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. At 9:30, Adrian sat in his office at Blake Technologies, staring at 2 letters. One was his resignation, formal and brief, citing personal reasons for stepping down as CEO. The other was longer, more detailed, outlining his vision for the company's future and his commitment to seeing it through regardless of personal cost. He thought about Jasmine's words, "You are more than Blake Technologies." He thought about his uncle's journal, the entries about building empires instead of love. He thought about the music room, and how Jasmine had taught him that the most beautiful melodies came from the spaces between the notes. At exactly 10 a.m., Adrian walked into the boardroom carrying only 1 letter. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, taking his place at the head of the table, I've made my decision. Margaret Foster leaned forward, and I'm not resigning. His voice was calm, certain. Blake Technologies is my company, built with my vision and my innovations. I won't abandon it because of media speculation or stock market volatility. Adrian Harrison Wells interjected, Be reasonable. I am being reasonable. I'm also being honest. Adrian looked around the table, meeting each board member's gaze. For 8 years, I've given this company everything I had. My time, my energy, my soul. I've made it the most innovative tech firm in the industry, and I've made all of you very wealthy in the process. Murmurs of agreement rippled around the table. But in the past 5 weeks, I learned something that I'd forgotten. A company without humanity is just a machine. And machines, no matter how sophisticated, don't inspire loyalty or innovation or the kind of passion that creates true breakthroughs. What are you saying? Margaret asked. I'm saying that Jasmine Rivers made me a better leader, not a worse one. She reminded me why I got into this business in the first place, to create technology that improves people's lives, not just to accumulate wealth and power. He stood up, placing his hands on the polished table. So here's what's going to happen. I'm implementing a new corporate philosophy at Blake Technologies. We're going to start a foundation that provides free technology training to underserved communities. We're going to invest in startups led by women and minorities. We're going to prioritize innovation over profit margins. And we're going to remember that behind every algorithm and every line of code, there are real people whose lives we have the power to improve. The room was dead silent. If that's not the kind of company you want to be part of, Adrian continued, then I'll buy out your shares at current market value. But I won't apologize for falling in love with someone who reminded me how to be human. Margaret Foster was the first to speak. The board will need to vote no, Adrian said firmly. The board will need to decide whether you trust me to run this company the way I see fit. If you don't, then we part ways amicably. But I won't be managed by fear anymore, and I won't sacrifice my personal integrity for stock prices. He walked toward the door, then paused without turning around. Oh, and Rebecca, you're fired. Clear out your office by the end of the day. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving 12 very wealthy people staring at each other. In stunned silence, Adrian found Jasmine in the place he should have looked first, the Community Legal Aid Clinic in Queens, where she'd started volunteering after leaving the mansion. She was sitting at a battered desk in a cramped office, reviewing case files for clients who couldn't afford better representation. She looked up when he walked in, and the shock on her face was quickly replaced by something more complicated. Hope mixed with wariness, love tangled with hurt. How did you find me? Your former boss at Morrison & Associates. Apparently you've become something of a legend in legal aid circles. The lawyer who turned down $50 million to keep her integrity intact. Jasmine closed the file she'd been reading. What are you doing here, Adrian? I quit Blake Technologies. Her face went pale. You what? Actually, that's not entirely accurate. I told the board they could accept my terms for staying, or they could find a new CEO. Either way, I was done being controlled by other people's fears, Adrian. No, you love that company. I love you, he said simply. The company is just a company. You are irreplaceable. Tears welled in her eyes. You don't understand. I gave up the inheritance. It's over. There's no reason for us to be together anymore, isn't there? He moved closer until he was standing beside her chair. Tell me, Jasmine, over the past week, have you thought about me? That's not the point. Have you missed the music room? The way we could sit in the library together for hours without speaking. The sound of my terrible jokes during dinner, Adrian. Because I've thought about you every minute of every day. I've missed the way you hum while you're reading. It's the way you get passionate about cases involving people you'll never meet. The way you make me want to be better than I am. He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. I don't care about the inheritance, Jasmine. I don't care that we met because of my uncle's manipulation. I care that we found each other, and I care that what we have is real. The board voted to accept my terms, unanimously as it turns out. Margaret Foster said it was the most inspiring leadership speech she'd heard in 20 years. Jasmine stared at him in shock. They did? Apparently authenticity is good. For business? Who knew? His smile was soft, hopeful. Blake Technologies stock is up 12% since my announcement this morning. Turns out investors like CEOs who stand up for their principles, and Rebecca, gone though I suspect, she'll land on her feet. Brilliant assistants who understand corporate espionage are always in demand. Asmin was quiet for a long moment, processing everything he'd told her. So what happens now? Now I ask you if you'll have dinner with me tonight. Not because of a legal contract or an inheritance clause, but because I love you and I want to spend time with you, Adrian.